and the Claude D. Pepper Older American Independent Centers, or Pepper Centers. The Aging Initiative, for those who may not be familiar with it, is led by Dr. Jerry Gerwitz at University of Massachusetts and the Myers Primary Care Institute, along with the co-PIs, Elizabeth Bass and Jay Magaziner. My name is Heather Whitson, and I'm faculty in the Duke University Pepper Center, and I co-lead the Aging Initiative's Dissemination Workgroup along with Leah Hanson at HealthPartners. So the first talk today will be diabetes, dementia, and MCC in males with hip fracture, and the second talk will be the do's and don'ts of the mentee-mentor relationship. So you're wondering why these two seemingly unrelated topics were slated for the same webinar, but this was not an accident or a mistake. The first talk today is going to present one of the Aging Initiative's first funded pilot studies, and because mentorship is an important piece of this and other pilot studies in the Aging Initiative, we put these two talks together. So before we started and introduce the first speaker, I'll cover just a couple of the technical details. So because of the number of registrants for today's webinar, the phone lines are on mute. Unless you are logged in as a host or a panelist, your line is muted. We do welcome and encourage audience participation. What we ask that you do is, if you want to submit a question, please use the Q&A function to type in your question. So if you're in the Cisco webinar portal right now, under the tab that says Presentation, and look in the upper right, you should see an icon, one for Q&A and one for chat. If you have a question, please submit it under the Q&A, and Leah and I will be keeping an eye out for those questions. And as time permits, we'll read all the questions after our speakers have talked. And if you have technical or logistical questions, like if right now you're not sure where to find that Q&A tab, we ask you to submit those using the chat function, assuming you can find that tab. Please make sure that you are identified by name or participant ID, and our webinar hosts will be able to help troubleshoot any problems or audio issues along the way. So with the chat function, you can choose whether you'd like your comment to be visible to everyone, or you can choose to send it only to the hosts. And I want to, at this point, extend a huge thanks to Catherine Anzuni and Joanne Wagner and the rest of their team, because they do an amazing job behind the scenes to make the webinars possible and troubleshoot along the way. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Laurel Copeland, our first speaker. Dr. Copeland conducts health services research focused on care for patients with serious mental illness and complex comorbidity profiles in both the federal and private nonprofit healthcare systems. She's trained in research methodology and program evaluation at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, while working on community-based alcohol survey research and large database studies in the Veterans Health Administration. She's active in the Healthcare Systems Research Network through her position in the Center for Applied Health Research, Baylor Scott and White Health in Temple, Texas, and in Health Services Research and Development as a research scientist in the VA of Central Western Massachusetts. He holds academic appointments at both Texas A&M Department of Medicine and UT Health Science Center San Antonio Department of Psychiatry. So thank you so much, Laurel, for agreeing to present your pilot work today. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I hope you remember how to change slides. So Copeland, I'm currently out in Massachusetts, but I do work at Baylor Scott and White Health in Texas and greatly enjoy my position in the Mental Health Research Network and the HCSRN, the Healthcare Systems Research Network as a whole. We were very pleased to receive the funding for this pilot project through the HCSRN-OAICs AGING Initiative, which is the collaboration just described. So how do I change slides? Thank you. The work together on this project, which was funded from April 2015 through March of 2016, included, of course, a partner from HCSRN, which was required according to the funding initiative rules, and a partner from the Claude Pepper Older Americans Independent Centers, the OAIC, and that partner was Charlene Quinn out at University of Maryland. Also had our statistician from Center for Applied Health Research. Her name is Eileen Stock. Midway through the project, she moved out to the Perry Point, Maryland VA. A little bit of a blow for our project, but we got through. And we had 2 junior scientists who are at Baylor Scott & White Health. We had Jin-Myung Cho and Rashmita Basu. My partner, John Zieber, was a collaborator, and also our partner from Henry Ford Health System out in Detroit, Michigan, Brian Amadani, was a collaborator. And he is the site lead for the Mental Health Research Network for Henry Ford Health System. And another requirement of the pilot, the Aging Initiative pilot project was that they met at least one mentee, and we are very happy to have 2. These junior investigators were Rashmita Basu, who has a special interest in cognitive decline into dementia, and Jin-Myung Cho, and she is studying healthy aging among the oldest old, that is to say, people who have passed their 85th birthday. Most of these junior scientists are working at the Center for Applied Health Research and have academic appointments at the Texas A&M. Okay. So the project at hand. As you know, 25% of adult Americans have a chronic health condition, and actually more than one chronic health condition, which we would call multiple chronic conditions, or MCC, as you'll see throughout these slides. And among those age 65 and older, 75% have multiple chronic conditions. We also noted in our background literature review that certain common chronic conditions associated with this risk of hip fracture, and these included dementia and type 2 diabetes, which how we found the intersection of interest that led to this project. Okay. So the project aim that was written as the Association of Multiple Chronic Conditions with Outcomes of Hip Fracture, and we specified 2 outcomes: 30-day admission and mortality, 1-year mortality. Actual aims were to try and make sure that everybody on the team got something out of the experience, and ended up developing into actual additional aims and papers. In the process of completing this 12-month project in a timely manner with many aims that we ended up with, I'll explain in a minute. I chose to tap into a VA administrative data project I had already gotten IRB approval for some years previously. These were data that were very familiar to me and to our student island stock, so we could get quite a bit of recoding and analysis in a timely manner. And they're quite expansive. So the project started with a cohort from fiscal years 2005 through 2009, and that fiscal year looks back a quarter, so it's October 2004 through September 2009. This is a Veterans Health Administration. I did capture that is all care data for about 6 million veterans per year. And this gave us the ability to look at somewhat rare conditions or subgroups. So a chosen cohort would be VA patients, male veterans in the Veterans Health Administration who had a diagnosed hip fracture, and used ICD-9 codes for that, and also a code for hip fracture repair on an inpatient basis. Looking at those 5 years of data, this netted us 3,851 male veterans. We also limited the age range to 50 to 100 years old. 50 may seem young for a study of aging, but in my previous work, which started in schizophrenia and other serious mental illnesses, I did note the VA patients age physiologically rather quickly. So if you want to look at age-related disorders, you probably want to start somewhat before the traditional age of 65. In fact, we found that 77% of our sample was over 65. In terms of mortality, about 31% died within the first year post-op. Okay. Well, did you notice that number of 896 persons age 85 or older? So objective achieved. Dr. always happy. But we needed to go to slide. We needed to define these multiple chronic conditions. then reinvent the wheel. We look to experts in the field, notably Mary Charlson, whose Charlson Comorbidity Index was developed in 1987 and has received a great deal of attention since then, and Elixhauser's Index of Chronic Comorbidity. The distinction between these two indices is that Charlson was looking at comorbidity associated with post-discharge one-year mortality. So those are essential mortal conditions, whereas Elixhauser, more recently, is looking at chronic conditions, and in between we move the managed care environment, and that whole area of preventative care is be more important. So we wanted to look at chronic conditions. All right, and we had a few other conditions we needed to operationalize, including mild cognitive impairment, because as I mentioned, this was an interest of Dr. Bessus. And we also counted up how many classes of medications for chronic conditions the patients were taking, and we noted whether they were on bone strengthening or depleting medications. We also collected the demographics and the VA priority status, which is essentially a measure of disability poverty that the VA uses to decide whether a veteran is eligible for VA care. There we go. What did we find for multiple chronic conditions? In the Charlson, there are 19 conditions in the original formulation, and in Elixhauser, there are 30. So that's a total of 49 conditions, but of course, there were some overlapping disorders. So we eliminated the 12 overlapping disorders, which actually knocked out 15 indicators because the scientists look at the same conditions somewhat differently, and that gave us 34 indicators of chronic comorbidity, of chronic conditions. And then we chose to model multiple chronic conditions two different ways. For one, we simply added up how many chronic conditions the patients had, and MCC variable was into the variable analysis. And on the other hand, we just held on to those 34 different indicators and put the whole lot of them into a different model. And noting that the Charlson does capture both dementia and diabetes, which were to our interest. Okay, so what did they have? Well, the top 5 chronic conditions were hypertension, affecting 2/3 of the sample, diabetes and chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, each affecting about 1/3 of the patients, dysanemia, 1/4 of the patients, and depression. So these are this is where you start to see some of that information about mental and physical comorbidity coming into play. That's a very important consideration. All right. Multivariate logistic regression models and adjusted for demographic and clinical covariates. Here are 2 dependent variables were 30-day readmission, and about 16% of patients experienced the event. And then 1 year post-op, as about 31% of the patients experienced the event. What do we find? We found that if we looked at it using the MCC count, which is the last line on this slide, multiple condition count, that CC was indeed associated with 30-day readmission. In fact, there was a 12% uptick in risk of 30-day readmission for additional chronic condition, cumulatively. On the other hand, medication class count was also related to 30-day readmission. That was about a 5% increased risk of 30-day readmission per class of medicine for a chronic condition. If we take the MCC count variable, leave everything else the same, and throw in those 34 indicators of specific comorbid conditions, we get something slightly different. On the one hand, we overwhelm the model. There's not enough power with that outcome to handle that many predictors, so we use stepwise selection to achieve a parsimonious model. And on the other hand, we notice that medication class count is still there. So this is interesting. 7% increased risk of 30 readmission per additional for chronic disorder. The specific conditions that remained significantly associated with this outcome were schizophrenia and dementia. So there we have a couple of cognitive disorders that affect your cognitive ability that could, you can easily imagine that could impact your ability to manage your post-operative care, self-care, and then some physical disorders such as renal disease, cardiac arrhythmias, obesity, and weight loss. Rounding to the second outcome, which was death within there. This goes to the model that has MCC, and there at the bottom, you see that multiple chronic condition count is significantly associated with death. About an 18% increased risk of death within the first year after hip fracture repair per additional chronic condition. However, medication class count is not related. The next model, and here this is again with the 34 specific predictors, conditions instead of MCC count. And again, you don't see the medication class count. That's not related, but some specific disorders that increase your risk of mortality, such as chronic heart failure, dementia, obstructive pulmonary disorder, liver diseases, certain cancers, and so on. Conclude from all this. Well, certainly MCC increased men's risk of adverse outcomes after hip fracture repair. And this increase in risk was really irrespective of specific types of conditions, that the kind of comorbid conditions was associated with increased risk. Each additional condition increased readmission risk by about 12% and mortality risk by about 18%. That your 30-day readmission risk doubled at 8 chronic conditions, and your mortality risk doubled at 6 chronic conditions. It's possible that we could consider support services for patients and families that includes this kind of information about chronic condition and risk of death and admission in the discharge planning phase. That they need to families and patients really need to be alert to this problem. And the second thing we thought was that medication management might be a fruitful area to investigate in terms of to reduce readmission risk, since that was specifically related to readmission risk. How to do on our aim? So what I reported on just now was our aim, our stated funded aim. But the partner from OAIC, Charlene Quinn, wanted to study the effect of diabetes. So she is looking at stratified analyses for those with and without diabetes. And Jin-Young Cho was interested in that old group and wanted to apply latent class analysis techniques. And Rashmita Basu was interested in whether the progression from normal cognitive status to mild cognitive impairment or to dementia, or from that immediate state to dementia, might predict worse outcomes for these hip fracture patients. So we did quite a bit more analysis than what you've just seen and worked on new papers. Okay. How to get all that done? Well, I pushed monthly teleconferences and used a lot of email and iCalendar invitations. At the first meeting, we reviewed the aims and methods pretty quickly, and we discussed how to accommodate everybody's interests. There was an agreement on aims for 4 different papers and who was responsible for leading those, and actually what the analyses roughly were going to be, although of course we refined those later. Invite collaborators to suggest additional papers at any time in the course of the one-year study, but fortunately no one took me up on my offer because we were really busy already. I did offer to meet with the mentees at additional times, and of course it's very important to follow through with that kind of offer. I needed to ensure that data development and analysis got done. That ended up meaning that, I did some of it myself after we lost Eileen's stock, but everything did get done. I wanted to keep the team informed of everything, all the steps. Nobody complained too much about putting me into junk mail, so I guess that worked out. I wanted to draft the methods and results sections for the 4 papers by the end of the funding period, and I wanted a good role model with timely development of the primary paper. I did want to discuss and agree on the choice of journals for all papers, taking into account what the mentees preferred. For example, not submitting the one paper to a journal that somebody particularly wanted to target. And of course, to be a good role model with submission of the primary paper. So those 2 little asterisks are things that were not completely accomplished. We did pretty well overall. Mentees think of all this. I did ask them, what was your experience? The good and the bad. They said that they really appreciated working with experts in the field of aging research, could help expand their research careers. In terms of topic and networking, colleagues, the sharing of all the documents, even from the very beginning when we were developing the grant application. Really appreciated getting prompt response to questions and requests. They provided with relevant literature, and some of that was topical, while a lot of it was actually methodological. They enjoyed having the monthly conference call to keep updated on the progress of the project. They having their own manuscript to develop that was related to everything else that was going on. They liked having something of their own. Still comprehensible within, the results generally being reported. They liked the fact that the manuscript was developed in a short period of time. They felt they learned more about electronic health record systems. They liked the fact that all the team members on this project were really engaged. For example, one mentee commented that she was really happy that she got feedback on a poster from every single member of the team. What didn't go so well? Well, there wasn't enough time, is there ever? There wasn't enough salary support. We didn't get another grant proposal within 12 months. That doesn't surprise me somehow. Funded to support them. And so they felt that the competition that we all feel with other projects. Okay. In terms of achieving goals, we did the first paper within the 12-month project time frame. All analyses were completed by June of 2016, so about 3 months in addition late there. All method and results sections were drafted shortly thereafter. One of the mentee papers is ready to submit. One, Dr. Cho, presented at the Aging Steering Committee, which was a good experience, I believe. Submitted abstracts to 2 conferences, and they were accepted. One, Dr. Basu, presented at the Pepper Center annual meeting, while Dr. Cho presented at the Healthcare Systems Research Network annual meeting. Dr. Zieber presented a talk I wrote at the same meeting. We had 3 calls about follow-up grant proposals, and one proposal was subsequently drafted. And mentees made new connections with researchers who share their interests. That concludes my formal remarks. I would be to entertain questions. Here's some contact information if you have something that you think of much later, and I'll open it up.
Thank you much for your presentation, Dr. Copeland. You've certainly been very successful at more than meeting your goals with your pilot funding from the Aging Initiative, and really an excellent example of successful mentoring. As a reminder, again, we're going to hold our questions until the end. If you could please type those into the Q&A box on the bottom right of the screen, and we'll start to compile those. Now we're going to move on to our second presentation. It has been clearly demonstrated in Dr. Copeland's talk, mentoring plays a very important role in science. But while mentorship can be an important part of success at each stage of an academic career, we don't often receive training on how to be a good mentor or a good mentee. The initiative is very pleased to have Dr. Rubio join us to address some of the do's and don'ts of the mentee-mentor relationship in her talk entitled Managing Up, Down, and All Around. Dr. Doris Rubio is Professor of Medicine, Biostatistics, Nursing, and Clinical and Translational Science at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Rubio directs the Evaluation Core in the Clinical CTSI and co-directs the Research Education and Training Core. She is a co-director of the Institute for Clinical Research Education, which provides training in clinical and translational research and offers multiple programs for career development. She is director of the Center for Research and Healthcare Data Center, which provides data management and analysis services across the university. Not only Dr. Rubio serves multiple leadership roles. She's past president for the Association for Clinical Research Training and past chair for the Evaluation Key Function Committee, and past chair of the Common Metrics Workgroup for the Clinical and Translational Science Awards. She was recently awarded the Educator of the Year Award for the Association for Clinical and Translational Science. Her recent funding is focused on diversifying the workforce. Thank you so much, Dr. Rubio, for agreeing to talk with us today about mentorship, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. My mom would be proud. So I thought I would, when we're talking about relationships, which was the title, I really started thinking, what do we do within relationships? We got to manage those relationships. And I started thinking about the various roles with regards to mentors. And as people, we do manage up, we manage our mentors, we manage our mentees down, and actually our peers. We get peer mentoring that we continuously manage as well. So I'm going to have this, whoops. Are you advancing or am I?
But if that's easier.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So this was a great definition I found of mentoring, which I think really demonstrates what the mentoring relationship should be about. It's so you have a mentee who's less experienced working with a mentor who should be very experienced. They're working together, and the mentor is teaching, guiding, supporting, and facilitating the professional growth. Now, you can have a variety of different mentors. Have mentors who are content mentors. You can have mentors who are career mentors. And so you can have different roles. It's not that one mentor has to do all of your professional growth. If you find a mentor who does all, that's fantastic. Don't ever lose them. So does it matter? I think is a really great question. And actually has been some research that has found that those who get mentoring have higher research productivity. There's mentoring with regards to teaching. Their team becomes more effective. There's an increase of professional interactions and overall just greater satisfaction at work. Break it down in between what is the mentee's role and what is the mentor's role. I think to be a good mentee, you really need to trust your mentor. You believe that the mentor wants what's best for you. Sometimes, it's sort of like kids and parents, and you tell your kids you have to go to bed, and they get very upset. But the point is, the parent really does have the best interest of the child at heart. It's that the child doesn't know enough at that stage to recognize sleep is important. Rather stay out and play video games. That's what the child thinks would be in his or her best interest. And then also be receptive to feedback. When I came to Pittsburgh, I was participating in a grant writing course. I was asked to attend to give some feedback on the methods that the trainees had written for their draft grants. And so I was asked to give feedback. I like giving feedback. I gave a lot of feedback. And then when I walked out, one of the students kind of, said to me, "Oh my goodness, I'm glad we weren't reviewing my grant today. You were brutal." And I thought, what? I was trying to give feedback. I think with feedback, it can be perceived as being too harsh, being too critical. I remember sitting down with my mentor one time, getting back from him. There was red everywhere. And I saw it. I'm like, oh my goodness, did I do anything right? And he's like, what? It was good paper. I'm like, but it's covered in red. He said, my job to give you the feedback. My back would be good. So that's, in terms of mentee, be receptive to that feedback, be open to that feedback. Don't think of it as being critical. Think of it as an opportunity to improve your work. The mentee also needs to communicate honestly. So when I sat down with my mentor and he would have all that feedback, which was helpful and definitely improved the paper, I'd say to him, it would help me if you give some positive feedback as well. Because to me, getting a more balanced sense, I don't walk out of there thinking I wrote the worst paper in the world, but I can get a better sense of what's good, what should I keep, and what should I not keep or revise. And so this feedback I had to give, communicate openly with him with regards to what my style is and trying to work with his style as well. Most importantly is to be respectful of your mentor. You have to know the way your mentor works. So there's somebody here at work who I'm in awe of all the things that she does and accomplishes, but she doesn't do email. And it's mind-boggling because you can email her and it goes into a void. Sometimes she responds, sometimes she doesn't. Her staff says, come stop me. If you want something, I'm in clinic. Don't mind. Come in. I have minutes. I can give you 5 minutes. Stalk me is great. However, for me, if a mentee stalked me, I would be not happy with that. Lots of meetings during the day, usually running from one to the other. And if I had someone, can I just call you? My mind is usually already on that next meeting. What do I need to bring? What do I need to prepare? That sort of thing. And I'm too distracted from my day. I much prefer somebody to email me. So, and for mentee and being respectful of your mentor, the way that gets operationalized, at least in my mind, is for the mentee to communicate openly and honestly, find out what mentors likes, dislikes, what are their styles. If the mentor is going to review a paper, how soon in advance does the mentor want it? I really dislike if somebody emails me a paper at 7 o'clock at night for an 8 o'clock meeting the next morning. But maybe that's your mentor style might say that that's fine, but you need to know. Because if it's not their style, they could get upset at the mentee, thinking the mentee is waiting till the last minute, but communication never happened. The mentor's role, you really need to trust the mentor and rely on the mentor's vision. I think it's really important when you're establishing the mentor and mentee relationship to talk about what the mentor's vision is so you can understand that vision and make sure you feel like that's in line with your vision as well. To be giving you that vision overall, where things going, and giving you some technical guidance a lot. So Go Workshop would be really great for you. Sending this paper to this journal would be a very good fit. Who can offer career advice, and those are mentors that can kind of help you do that 5-year plan. That's the career advice. It'd be that work-life plan. Balance, but to me, I really see it more of a work-life integration. Work is very much a part of my life. There are people, and I used to be much more compartmentalized, but I found that I spent so much energy being compartmentalized that it didn't work. Sometimes when I'm at work, I need to make phone calls to the bank, to wherever, or make arrangements for going away this weekend or something along those lines. Like I have to do everything for home at home and everything for work at work. To me, it created too much stress. So I'm trying to live now under the motto of work-life integration. The mentor's role is, of course, networking. I really expect that mentor to, if you're at a conference, for the mentor to bring you and say, I want to introduce you to so-and-so, I want to introduce you to so-and-so, to help you get that networking component. That's such an important aspect for a mentee to be able to be exposed to people who are more advanced in the field. Sometimes it could be intimidating for the mentee to walk up and introduce him or herself. So when the mentor does that, that's, I think, very helpful and very useful. Now, just something I thought was, drove home the point. It's really important to understand what those roles are, because otherwise things run amok. And in addition to those roles, understand what the styles your mentor likes so it can be responsive to that. Because I don't think it works if the mentee says, you know, it's my style to send the paper at the last minute because I probably won't get it written until 7 o'clock and I know we're meeting at 8. If I'm the mentor in that situation, I'm going to say, well, then I'm not going to have it read. You need to be respectful of what's the mentor's style and preferences as well. For the mentees, when you're looking for a mentor, be selective. Know what kind of qualities you want in a mentor. It's really helpful to know your style and the type of person that you'll be able to work well with. I think that understanding what someone's experience and skills are for sure is really important because you need to know what you can rely on that person for. And I suggest to people, have a trial period. Try to, meet someone and say, will you be my mentor? It seems very forced. Maybe start collaborating on a paper together, make sure that there's some synergy there. It's almost like by the time you have an official mentor-mentee relationship, it's been a foregone conclusion that that was happening because that's just been building over time. Become cartoons. Learn about your mentor. This era of computer internet, there's so much information out there. Sure, Google your mentor. It may sound funny, but I think it's a great idea. Find what they've done, not just what they've published, but other things. Have they been on the news for anything? Have they been a consultant for anything? Are they involved in other organizations? Maybe I found out today that one of my colleagues is a phenomenal ultimate frisbee player. So find out about your mentor to know him or her. I think it helps with building that relationship. And then talked about really being open to feedback, and I think being non-defensive is really important. I hold reviews for our KL2 scholars here, and the thing that I tell them when they go into the review is you're going to get a ton of feedback. You sit there and say nothing, because it's not going to help for you to say, oh wait, it's on page 28, you missed it, because that's when your grant really gets reviewed. So you receive feedback if you're already trying to defend yourself. That by definition, you're open, and it's difficult to really improve if you're not open to that feedback. I think to keep your mentor informed of things. Let's say your mentor had to cancel a meeting for some reason. I think it's a great idea then to turn around and say, completely understand, I'll see you at next Tuesday meeting. I just wanted to let you know I submitted the manuscript, I did this, I did that, or any challenges that you're having. I think it's very difficult for a mentor to be doing an effective job with the mentee if the mentee is going through a crisis and the mentor has no idea. So they're going to think, what is wrong with this person? They can't seem to get the draft of the manuscript out. It could be that the mentee is in a state of crisis, or spouse is, trying to considerable amount on work, and there's ordinary duties at home that are making it difficult. So I think it's just important to keep the mentor informed of all these things. Some old tips is to your mentor. I hear mentees say, oh, don't bother him, he's too busy, or I know she's going to be traveling, so I don't want to have her worry about X, Y, or Z. You sit down with your mentor, bring your calendar, and say, can we do regular weekly meetings? What works best for you? I understand there's going to be times when you're traveling, you need to cancel, or perhaps something else comes up, but let's just schedule these for the year. That way, on your mentor's calendar, you don't have to try and worry about scheduling something each week and contacting his or her assistant and not able to get on the calendar. If you do it for a year, and you can always cancel meetings, that's very easy to do. And I can find out your mentor's preference. I would assume that many of them would like to get the materials at time or even potential agenda. So if you're on Tuesday, maybe on Monday afternoon, you send an email and say, we're meeting tomorrow morning, here's the things I'd like to talk about. Because I think it's really great for the mentor to be able to reflect and think about if you're talking about, should I go to this conference or not, if you set an agenda ahead of time, the mentor can then do some legwork, and you can have a more productive meeting as a result. This is something I think is interesting, and I don't think enough people do it. When I view your mentor, I don't mean to ask them things like, are you a good mentor or are you a bad mentor, but asking them about them. The number one thing people like to talk about is themselves. So find out about their life experiences, their career path. How did they get to where they are right now? What did they learn along the way? What were some challenges they had? How did they overcome those challenges? And you can kind of sum it up with, well, you've had an amazing, career story, advice that, you think would be really helpful, kind of make my career successful as yours has been successful. Any, nuggets that you can take away with you, lessons learned, those sorts of things. It's in that by interviewing that mentor, hearing about the mentor's life experiences can really create a different kind of bond between the mentor and mentee. Like I said, unfortunately, many people do not do that. They stick everything to keep it all work focused, and I think you lose an opportunity there to have a stronger bond between the mentor and mentee. Seek career advice from your mentor. If somebody is your mentor, that person's gone through what we're going through now. So definitely get the career advice. Find out kind of expectations, how to build a career, when's a good time to submit grants, should they seek all kinds of funding, how to deal with a conflict if you have it, how to maintain that balance, how have they done it? Have they gone through and had kids, and how are they managed to, be successful while raising 5 kids, or, whatever the case may be. Getting that career advice, I think, is something that, in the other one, we just see our mentors as strictly kind of content mentors, and we forget about those other components of life. Other components of life, maternity leave would be a good time to write your manuscript. I think, understanding what those expectations are ahead of time is really important, because then this then goes to the next slide, which we're talking about mentor's responsibility. The mentor should instill trust in the mentee so that the mentee feels that the mentor has created an open, communicative environment, that the mentee feels comfortable bringing whatever issues are there. Certainly, the mentor should display integrity and ethics. If the mentee has a script, the mentor's name should not go first on that manuscript. The mentor should not be saying, just tweak this and then send it out. You can get 2 grants for the same thing. You need to be able to rely on your mentor's judgment, so that mentor really should be of the highest integrity. And we want us to be generous. I think very strongly that when someone says, yes, I will be a mentor, what that then says is, I will give you my time, I will give you my energy, I will give you my thoughts, I will help you on your projects, I will help you with your grants, because that's what we are looking to mentors to do. So be generous with all of that, because if you submit something to your mentor and have to wait a month until you get it back, so you and I both know that's not very helpful. Mentors need to be respectful of the mentee and know that the mentee wants things done on time and needs to be respectful of their time as much as the mentee being respectful of the mentor's time. Feedback should be honest and timely, and I like that balanced feedback as well, because I think it's a lot easier for the mentee to receive feedback when it's more. Certainly the mentor should be supporting the mentee in all that he or she does. So if the mentee decides that we want to submit a grant in October, I think supporting the mentee doesn't mean, and we're in September, means, okay, I'll support you, let's do it. That support is, I'm going to support you all that I can, and that support means you cannot submit in October. Your grant will not be ready. You haven't written a word yet. Let's figure out how we can submit it in February. Let's draw up a timeline so that you can get something done. That's truly supporting the mentee. in these mentor-mentee relationships. There are, I like to call, tormentors, who sometimes just want the mentee to be like him or herself. And I've met with people who had a mentor like that, and it's quite challenging. And that's a difficult conversation that you need to have with the mentor if you're going in a different direction. But that needs to be communicated, because it's not helpful to be quiet and make the mentor believe that you're moving in the same direction as him or her, but yet you're running in a complete opposite direction. Because nothing worse than the mentor finding out something about the mentee from somebody else. If you have a mentor who's like that, communicate, please. If you're a mentor who's like that, then you should not. It would be wise to be open to the mentee's career choices along the way. There are also people on both sides, mentors and mentees, who might have difficulty communicating or struggle to communicate when there's challenging issues. That needs probably unresolved, and that becomes very difficult, because when someone has difficulty communicating and then problems go unresolved, they fester, and they grow, and they build, and they become worse and worse. So the situation where you got to fire your mentor, and that's really uncomfortable and really, really difficult. And no one wants to be in that space. So I think that by communicating early and often, sometimes it may be helpful if you have second mentor to have two mentors in the room together, so that they know each other, and perhaps the other mentor could be the balancing between you and the mentors to be able to create a more open situation. My comics, Tom is more than encouraging people to be just like you. This is an example of trying to clone the mentor. But it's difficult, and there is actually a great book called Difficult Conversations, and I would recommend all of you to get it and read it at any level. I find the book to be very, very helpful when you're trying to communicate something that's difficult, because people are sensitive and conflicts do happen. So when conflict, stop and look and say, okay, who's involved in this conflict? It's good to figure out how did that person respond, and then what was your conflict strategy? Think about what you've done in the past when you've encountered a conflict. Did you find one of doing the silent treatment? That's, as we both know, not very effective. But on the slide, there's a really great figure, I think, that shows different ways of handling conflict, and really wanting to get to the top right-hand corner of this figure, and that's the collaboration. There are people who try to avoid things, but that's really unassertive. There are people that tend to be more accommodating. Unassertive, and you're accommodating, sometimes that leads to compromising yourself, not compromising with each other. So I think looking at this, it's really helpful to figure out, use that conflict inventory, those 3 questions a couple slides ago, and think about where you are on this, and maybe things that you could do to be more collaborating. When with a problem, I always like to think about it as separate problems. So let's address the problem, and let's let people out of it. That then leads to a more productive relationship, because if you're focused on resolving the problem, it's easy to get both people focused on resolving the problem. It's productive, and he said, she said, you did, I did. You can really talk with each other about the problem. Okay, manuscript wasn't submitted. Forget who did or who didn't. What do we do to get it out the door this week? Then leads to more productivity. Listen to people. You've all been in meetings where you're sitting around the room, and you know who's going to speak next, because they're kind of on the edge of the chair, and they're just waiting for that person to finish so they can make their point. That person's not actively listening. That person's listening until that person is quiet so that they can get their point out there. So if you're listening, don't worry about what you're going to say. Listen to what the other person says. Hear what they're saying, digest what they're saying. Speak understood. Talk about yourself. When I did this, so making it not, once you're talking about other people, when you said this to me, it makes them on the defensive. So about the problem, I think, leads to a more productive conversation. On this 2x2, on this 2x2, I think you can list as what is the intent? Intentions. This is the other person's. You don't know what their intentions are. We've all encountered a situation where, in fact, I did this last night with my husband. I was around trying to make dinner, and he said something. I don't even remember what it was, but I kind of, turned and said something kind of quick, and he said, "Whoa, are you me?" And I'm like, "What? No, sorry, I'm just making dinner. I was just trying to respond." He was aware of my intentions and interpreted them to be negative towards him, when in fact they weren't. My intentions were, I'm just trying to get dinner because it was already 8 o'clock at this point. So you got to be cognizant of the fact that you don't know where other people are coming from. You can certainly infer. You can have your opinion as to what it is, but you know what those are. This is an interesting aside as we're talking about conversations. There's been some research done with email that has found that people take email negatively. I know I've been guilty of this. I see an email and I'm like, wow, I can't believe this person said this. And it was somebody else and they're like, oh, well, that seems fun. Just, making you aware of X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then if you get an email, if you find that email to be negative, try reading it from the different perspective, not with an immediate negative slant on it. You may find a very different story. In difficult conversations, you can more of a learning conversation, so you can hear other people's perspective. You can express your views and feelings. The point is to work together to reach that problem. Make about the problem. Don't make it about you. I think that mentees do struggle with, perhaps, is managing meetings. I love when a mentee comes in, has an agenda, we go through the agenda, the mentee gets what he or she needs. I find it much more challenging when the mentee comes in and sits down and it's like waiting to drive the ship. This is not my career, this is the mentee's career, and the mentee really needs to use it to be productive. Just reporting, okay, I'm going to submit this manuscript next week, working on the grant, I'll have things to you by Tuesday, and that productive meeting. That could have happened. Reporting can happen in an email. It does not need to be in a meeting. Use a meeting to be productive. Brainstorm with a mentor, get a mentor's input on whatever it is that you need. Be on time, and leave on time. Some mentors don't mind that, but again, you want to really be respectful of them. And I have found, and there's research to support, that having fewer than 8 people in a meeting is much more productive. I have reviewed K awards for NIH, and I always get really nervous when I see a mentoring team of like 10 people, because at some point it's ridiculous. You'll be spending all your time managing mentors and none of your time being to be productive, which is what you want to be. I always find it a good idea is to follow up after the meeting and say, okay, this is what we talked about. They don't have to be elaborate minutes. They can just be bullet points. But the idea is to capture those action items so people know what it is they need to do going forward so that you can keep on moving. So we discussed the group today. Bob's going to review my aims and send them back to me by September 5th. Julie's going to read the draft of the manuscript and send that to the team. Whatever it is that you're doing so you capture those action items. Dumbing down from the mentor's perspective, working with the mentee. Working with a mentee and you are giving them feedback. I think it's really helpful to watch the body language. If you see the mentee crossing their arms, back in the chair, for example, that means they're becoming defensive. So you want your feedback to be heard, suggested. So the way of doing that is to give feedback that's not judgmental, feedback that is constructive. So if you think about NIH grant reviews, I find those best reviews and the most helpful reviews not be things like, you know, the design of this study is a good approach to answer the hypothesis. Okay, that's negative feedback. The reviewer instead said, in a randomized clinical trial, the investigative team would have been wise to start with an observational study, given a lack of information in this field. There's not enough evidence to support a clinical trial. The helpful one saying start an observational study. And when my mentees get feedback that have that helpful information from study section, I tell them, to me, that they really liked your grant, they want to be helpful. And it's the mentor's role to be helpful, to be constructive. The best way to help the mentee is be constructive and not just give negative feedback. Besides that point, timely feedback as well. In terms of giving advice as a mentor, I think something that Joe Quick do, mine is I like the mentee to reach his or her own conclusions, to assess what are my expectations for that mentee. It's not me, it's about that mentee, and thinking what is best for that mentee to doing at this particular time. If it's something that is out of my wheelhouse, for example, if they need some help with genomics or proteomics, I know when to refer out. That's beyond my area, so I think it would be good for you to meet with X, Y, or Z. Find one for that mentee to meet with to be able to get that particular expertise. Remember, feedback, you're giving suggestions. These are requirements to maintain the mentor-mentee relationship. Challenging. There are all sorts of different kinds of people in the world. Race issues, there are sex issues, there are age issues, there's ethnicity issues, there's disability backgrounds, there's generational issues, there's issues, cultural issues, disciplines, and sexual orientation. I'm sure I could keep adding to the list. All of this makes mentoring much more challenging. So does gender really matter? This was a study, Macy study, that was done in 1999 and 2000, where they interviewed mentors. And this says, I have a lot of preconceived prejudices that I have to overcome. As a man, to tell the truth, I don't have as much trouble cross-mentoring a male African American as I do with a white female. It is harder for me to mentor a female than a man, simply because I don't always understand how they're thinking. That's nothing to do with my belief that they should be mentored equally well. I'm just not sure I know how to do it. And I applaud this person because you have to recognize where your shortcomings are. All of us have them. Another quote, he was a male and I am African American. I love from his perspective. I like to think he learned a lot from mine. We were positively challenging. He came out of Indiana, and I was probably the second African American he had contact with. Not had that experience, so he and I got to learn about kosher and about African American experiences and things he may have thought of in stereotypes or cultural things. And I learned a lot from him. A very good experience. Now, an example of where the previous person said, I have a hard time mentoring women. This person said, this diversity brought strength to their relationship. In terms of mentoring diversity, I think to be open to approaches. recognizing whether you're the mentee or the mentor, everybody's different. Even if somebody looks like you and talks like you, there's the things that are going to be completely different. Appreciate those differences, embrace those differences, and by doing so, you can experience like that previous quote where you both learn a lot from the relationship. They're being open, being judgmental, of course don't stereotype, but when you take the differences into account and you embrace those differences, I think that it strengthens both people in that relationship. And it's because it's that previous quote about being kosher, or find out about what it's like for this person as an African American. I think when you're open and you discuss those things, it really does strengthen the relationship beyond if you pretend that diversity is not there. So here's some useful resources for you. I don't know if people are familiar with the National Research Mentoring Network. NRMN is a national organization that's funded by NIH. NIH is, well, I forgot to put the URL. I can put that into the chat box to register. NIH recognizes that we need to diversify the workforce, and the more diverse the workforce is to better reflect what the population is, I think the more richer research will be in general. And there has lots of research that found diverse teams are more productive, diverse teams get cited more often, etc. So what NIH did is said, in order to diversify the workforce, we have mentors for people from diverse backgrounds. So they funded this National Research Mentoring Network. It's a network of diverse mentors. It's a network of people who are committed to mentoring people from diverse backgrounds. And it also has a whole host of programs like grant writing and things of that nature for mentees who are diverse backgrounds. An effort, this global effort to help diversify the workforce. Summit is a supplement award from NRMN, and it is for people who are at the associate professor level and above. There's two components of it: the career coaching training, which we are offering September 14th, 15th, and 16th in Pittsburgh. We cover lodging. Yes, this is a paid advertisement. We cover lodging and most meals. You have to get to Pittsburgh. The career coaching is at the Hyatt. So at the airport, you just walk to the Hyatt. Stay there. As I said, we cover your lodging and meals, and then you can right back home. If anybody wants additional information, please feel free to email me. In addition to the career coaching, we do have a year-long fellowship, an NRMN fellowship. Applications for those are closed. We already have enrolled our fellows for this year, but that entails online leadership training. These are online modules focused on leadership. We have things like understanding academia, where we talk about budget and how the money flows. We have module on understanding the code, where we talk about the hidden code in academia and how to navigate at different levels through academia. We have a module on strategic planning, another one on leading your research team, etc. You can go to the website and find out more about that if you're interested. Contact information is on there as well. So with I will close. I think this was the time that we have any kind of questions. I'll defer to you. You probably saw I have additional slides, but I didn't want to monopolize the time, and I wanted to make sure we had time for discussion.
Thank you, Rubio, for your excellent presentation addressing this very important topic of mentorship. I learned so much from your great examples and your stories. I'd like to open it up for questions for either of our speakers. Heather, you had a question from the chat, the Q&A.
So there was one question. I believe that this one is for Dr. Copeland. So hopefully you're still on with us. And it was if you could comment on functional status and how adjusting for considering functional status in your findings. If you could comment on how that might affect the models.
Sure. Functional status would be a wonderful dependent variable or covariate if it were, handled properly, it'd be ideal to have functional status prior to the hip fracture and perhaps even afterwards. The problem is that in our administrative database, we don't have measures of functional status. That's also a limitation of using an administrative database. It has lots of codes and things that happened and things were determined in terms of diagnosis and lab values for patients, but it frequently doesn't have the more qualitative outcomes or patient-reported outcomes that we like to work with. So that would direct us into using a different data source or a different study design where we would collect functional status.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's other questions. Looks like right now the conversation is still about helping people find audio. I did have one question for Dr. Rubio, and that was I love the fact that you addressed the issue of diversity in the mentor-mentee relationship and issues around that and the real positive influence that can be had if it's handled appropriately. I wanted to ask about diversity with respect to generation, and in particular, I think that there has been some written about sort of generational shifts, most recently maybe more dramatic than in past shifts that sometimes affect the mentor-mentee relationship. So differences between millennial generation expectations and culture as opposed to older generations' expectation and culture, and how particularly maybe differences in technical savvy and comfort and differences in sort of work-life balance expectations or differences in formality versus informality. I wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yes, I have two great stories that I think capture exactly what you're talking about. So one was I was going to a meeting and I ran into somebody. This was just after the Christmas break, and I said, "Hello, so-and-so, how are you? How was your break?" And he goes, "It was fabulous. I was in the lab every day." And nobody was there to bother me. And I got so much work done. I'm laughing because think about, he obviously was of an older generation. I'm laughing because think of his mentees. If the expectation that they lab every day over the holiday break, that's a problem. I mean, and actually, it is a problem because he does have a couple mentees who are struggling with that, because he's of the older generation where you put your head down, you're at work from 7 to 7 or to 11 maybe, but with somebody else who's from a different position. And the younger generation who comes in is very much focused on really more of that work-life balance and not work-life integration. And it's 5 o'clock or 5:30, whatever, and they want to be home. They're choosing to work part-time so that they don't have that creep into their life, work creep into their life. There's another story of a medical student. That's why I said, one email, because people take it negatively. So this medical student was trying to work on a paper with the mentor, but really not making much progress. And so the mentor reached out a few times and sent the medical student an email, and the medical student didn't answer because the medical student didn't have the paper completed. So at one point, the medical student attached a draft of the paper, and the mentor wrote back, and it was very, very drafty, and the mentor wrote back and said, we would be further along with this paper, we should probably meet and discuss. The medical student took the negative sign opposed to, the mentoring to help and meet and figure out what they needed to do. So the medical student then emailed her program director, she was in one of our programs, emailed program director and said something to the effect that she's in trouble with the head of the lab and she probably needs to find a new mentor. And this became this whole big issue. And then a couple of days later, after a series of emails bouncing back and forth, the medical student then emailed the program editor and said that she was fired from the lab. And the program director was like, what happened? Calls the mentor, conversation with the mentor who is just as confused. So this is, I think your generation, especially texting and can be very terse. And being very terse can be perceived as very negative. And people, when you see something as being very negative and you interpret it as such that you're fired, I think that's a huge problem. The take homes from that is, really what I talked about in the slides is being open, but sometimes that openness cannot happen via email. And if you can understand, regardless of which generation you are from, perspective or what background, you need to understand people's ways of working. Because while I told you that person from an old generation was of the mindset that you really should be in the lab from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., that's everybody of that generation. Sure, other people are effective, but if you make that assumption and that stereotype of everybody, that will get you in trouble as well. That's why I think it's good to sit down, have a conversation. What we do at Pittsburgh is we have people do mentor-mentee contracts. I don't know if people have heard them before. But what the contract is an opportunity for the mentee and mentors to sit down and think about what are expectations, what are going to be our deliverables, who's going to be responsible for doing what, how frequently will we meet. And in a contract, which is great, we make them, who in our program, turn it into us. And I heard feedback from our scholars who say, this contract is great because it's the mentor who's saying, no, we can't cancel the meeting this week. We said in the contract that we would meet at least once a week, and we haven't met yet this week. So they're the ones that are really focused on that and holding up to their end of the bargain, which is great because it doesn't leave the mentee in that awkward position of, to call the mentor out on something.
Those comments and completely agree that it is sort of another example of diversity and can really kind of enrich the team as long as those expectations are addressed positively and upfront, and good transparency is there. Do we have any other? I don't see any that have been submitted, but if anyone has one, feel free to submit through the or Q&A functions.
Can I just suggest something?
Sure.
That Research Mentoring Network, I hope that everybody at least goes with the light and looks at it. You can be anybody to register. So you don't have to be, for the promise I said it's the associate level or above, but that's not true for NRMN. In fact, administrator registered. They have all of people, and the way that works is when you register, if they're searching for a mentor, for example, they might search, let's say, come across your profile. If they feel like that would be a good match from them, then they kind of check the box and say, yes, they would like this person to mentor. An email comes to you from NRMN, not from mentee, and asks if you would be willing. You can then go look at the mentee's profile. And I talk with the mentee once a week for 4 months, I think, is, for a half hour. So it's not much of a commitment. And they do have an incredible number of programs and other resources that are really amazing. So I'd encourage everybody to go look at the website and then hopefully register.
We did have one other question submitted, which I'll read here, and it says, do you view the mentor as being responsible for guiding mentees to discover their own interests and motivations and make their decisions and insights, as opposed to the mentor being the one who should give informed advice and provide answers?
That's a wonderful question. So with their coaching training that we're doing, what it enables you as a mentor to try and ask a mentee poignant questions to help a mentee really drive his or her own career, kind of like authoring their career trajectory. I over to this way of thinking because there is research that suggests that if one is driving their own career, they're likely to be sustained in that career. So you can imagine a traditional mentoring approach comes in and says, hey, I heard about this conference, should I go? And the mentor is like, yes, that would be a great conference for you to go to. Here's the people you should meet with. You can submit a poster too, because you'll get a lot of face time. The mentee coming in and says, hey, I found this conference, do you think I should go? And the mentor saying, well, let's think about it. What's the focused on? Who would be some people there that you'd like to meet with? And really help driving the mentee towards making that decision so that the mentee walks out and says, I'm definitely going to this conference. I'm definitely going to submit a poster. And so these names are going to be there. Could you connect me with them? That is that person taking ownership over his or her own career, which I think is great. But I think career coaching is still somewhat a new approach, but that's why we're offering this training so that mentors can start adopting it into their mentoring.
All right, and I think I have not seen any further questions be submitted, so I think that probably brings us to the end of the webinar. And I just want to once again thank both Dr. Copeland and Dr. Rubio for sharing their work and their with us. This was a really nice set of presentations. And thanks to all those who phoned in. You have about 10 minutes of found time.